Imagine this. By 1900, the United States,
Mhm.
it was producing more industrial goods than Great Britain and Germany combined.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a pretty staggering thought, right?
Yeah.
And it just throws into sharp relief how incredibly fast things were changing in America then.
For sure.
And that's exactly what we're going to dig into in this deep dive. You want to get the key info, the stuff that really makes you feel like you understand it without getting buried
Yeah.
in tons of historical details.
That's the plan.
That's our goal here.
Absolutely. And we've got a really solid overview of that whole American industrialization era, basically 1865 to 1900 as our guide.
Okay.
It covers, the big economic shifts,
Yeah.
the social changes, railroad building, which is a huge story in itself, the rise of giants like steel and oil,
Right.
the social impact, what was happening in the New South, and even the beginnings of the labor movement. It's a lot.
It sounds like a lot.
But we're here to help you zero in on what really mattered.
Okay, so let's unpack that first stat a bit more. That 1900 industrial output thing. It's not just like a fun fact.
No, not at all.
It signals this massive shift in global power, doesn't it? The U.S. suddenly surging to the front.
Right. And what's wild is just a few decades before, the U.S. was really leaning heavily on European money, European capital.
Yeah.
Then, boom, after World War I, it completely flips. The U.S. is the world's creditor.
That kind of turnaround.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen overnight. It speaks volumes.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about America's place in the world. Think about the changes inside the country.
Okay.
In 1880, half of all American workers, agriculture.
50%. Wow.
By 1920, that drops to just a quarter, 25%.
That's a seismic shift in how people lived, worked, everything.
Totally. And if you connect that, this rush to the cities,
Yeah.
concentration of wealth in industry,
Mm.
it inevitably starts creating bigger gaps, right, between social classes.
Absolutely. And driving all this unbelievable change
Yeah.
was this just explosion of new technology. I mean, innovations that completely rewrote the playbook.
Yeah.
Steel, for example. It wasn't just, a stronger metal.
No, it was the bedrock.
It was the foundation.
Right,
We're
yeah.
talking about, was it 192,556 miles of railroad track by 1900.
More than all of Europe put together.
That's just mind-blowing. And those tracks weren't just lines on a map. They were like the nation's arteries.
Mm-hmm. Connecting everything. Resources, factories, markets.
Reshaping the whole economy, even how people thought about the country. And then oil comes along,
Right, fueling the internal combustion engine.
which leads to cars and, hey, the start of suburbs.
And subways, streetcars, changing cities fundamentally.
What's so interesting, I think, is how these techs fed off each other.
Definitely. Like electricity. It wasn't just the light bulb, though that was huge.
Right.
It powered the factories, made them run longer, more efficiently, and refrigerated rail cars.
Oh, yeah, that changed everything for food.
Completely. How food got moved around, distributed. It affected what people ate, how big the markets could get.
And don't forget the business side of things. The telephone, 1876. Right.
Hook bell, yeah.
Yeah.
And the typewriter, cash registers, adding machines.
These weren't just gadgets. They streamlined how business got done.
And crucially, they opened up new kinds of jobs. Office jobs.
And a lot of women moved into those roles, right? A big shift.
A huge shift. And it wasn't just about work and industry either.
Yeah.
You start seeing the seeds of modern mass culture.
Yeah. Like cameras, phonographs,
Bicycles were huge.
moving pictures, the very first ones, amusement parks, pro sports starting up.
It gives you this glimpse into how leisure time was changing too.
It's fascinating. And you got to remember, this second industrial revolution, as historians call it,
Mm-hmm.
it was just different league from the first one. The first was more textiles, coal, iron, those really early railroads. This was bigger, faster, more transformative.
Definitely. Now, should we dive into the railroads? Because they were, arguably, the real engine driving so much of this early expansion.
Let's do it. The scale is just hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. And the government was right in the thick of it, offering these massive land grants. What was it, 155.5 million acres total?
Whoa.
And loans, too, especially for building out west, where it wasn't going to be profitable right away.
And the idea was what? Connect the country. Security.
Both, yeah. Link everything up physically, make it more secure, especially out in those less populated areas.
And the impact on towns. It was like night and day, wasn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. Railroad comes through, your town booms, trade, people, businesses.
But if it bypasses you.
Yeah, you could be on your way to becoming a ghost town. Simple as that.
And the big one, the Transcontinental Railroad,
Mhm.
finished 1869. That felt like a massive moment.
It was a massive moment. The Pacific Railway Act that authorized it passed in 1862.
Right in the middle of the Civil War.
Which tells you just how vital the government thought linking East and West was, even then.
So you had the two companies building it, right? Tell us about them.
Right, so you had the Union Pacific starting in Omaha and heading west. They used a lot of Irish immigrant labor, the Paddies, they were often called.
Tough work. Dangerous, too.
Incredibly demanding pace, plus dangers like attacks from Native American tribes trying to protect their land. And you had those hell-on-wheels towns.
Ah, yes, the mobile towns that followed the track layers.
Exactly. Rough, lawless places. And then there was the Credit Mobilier scandal.
Oh, boy. Explain that one.
Basically, the guys running the railroad also owned the construction company, so they paid themselves way over the odds using government money.
Pocketing millions.
Yeah, like $73 million for maybe $50 million worth of work. And they bribed congressmen to look the other way. Classic insider stuff.
Okay, so that's the Union Pacific. What about the Central Pacific coming from California?
Right, pushing east from Sacramento. That was the big four guys like Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington.
Powerful figures.
Very. Their operation was generally seen as a bit cleaner, financially speaking, but the work itself, crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains, incredibly tough. They relied heavily on Chinese laborers. Coolies was the term used then. Cheap labor, yes, but incredibly dangerous work. Blasting tunnels, laying track.
The death toll was high, wasn't it?
Tragically high. But they got it done. The two lines finally met at Promontory Point, Utah.
The Golden Spike moment.
That's the one. The Union Pacific laid 1,086 miles, Central Pacific 689. It was this huge symbolic event.
Monumental, really. Linking the coasts by rail, by telegraph, too.
Absolutely. It opened up the West like never before, boosted trade with Asia. I mean, people at the time saw it as big as the Declaration of Independence.
That's how important it felt.
Yeah, it really shows the perceived significance. And that was just the first one. Others followed pretty quickly.
Right. The Northern Pacific, the Santa Fe.
Southern Pacific, James J. Hill's Great Northern. They all played a huge part in knitting the country together and boosting the economy. Hill was interesting. He really saw his railroad's success tied to the prosperity of the land it served.
So after this initial building frenzy, what happened? Did things settle down?
Well, you get a period of consolidation and also major improvements. Cornelius Vanderbilt?
The Commodore?
Right. He really pushed for using steel rails on his New York Central line. Much safer, much more efficient than the old iron ones.
And made him incredibly rich.
Massively wealthy. But
Yeah.
then you had other figures like Jade Gould and Russell Sage. They controlled huge networks, especially out west.
But they had a worse reputation.
Often, yeah. More associated with things like stock watering.
Explain stock watering. Sounds dodgy.
It is.
Hmm.
Basically, you inflate the value of your company's stock on paper, make it look worth way more than its actual assets.
And then sell those inflated shares.
Exactly. Sell them to investors who don't know better. They get left holding the bag when the real value comes out.
So shady dealings alongside real progress.
Pretty much, because you did get crucial improvements. Steel rails became standard, track gauges were standardized, so trains could run anywhere. The Westinghouse air brake made things much safer.
Pullman cars for comfort.
Right. So this whole network, getting bigger and better, its impact was just enormous.
Like what? Give us the rundown.
Okay, it spurred industrialization, especially steel. It physically unified the country, created this huge domestic market.
Opened up the West. Mining, farming, ranching.
Fueled migration to cities, helped immigration they advertised in Europe, attracted foreign investment, led to time zones.
Right. Got to coordinate those schedules.
Created a new railroad aristocracy, and downside, really pushed Native Americans off their lands.
Yeah, that's a crucial, tragic part of the story. And these robber barons, as they got called.
Controversial legacy for sure.
Jay Gould manipulating stock prices. That stock watering thing.
Yeah, and because the stock was inflated, companies often had these huge debts, which meant pressure for higher rates, cutthroat competition, sometimes safety suffered, farmers got squeezed.
And they had immense power, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Bribing politicians, lobbying like crazy, basically handpicking who got elected sometimes.
They colluded too. Pools and rebates.
Right. Pools were secret agreements to divide markets and fix prices. Rebates were secret discounts for big shippers, which hurt smaller guys.
And that long haul, short haul thing.
Yeah, charging farmers more to ship something a short distance than it cost the big company to ship something much further on the same line.
Yeah.
Really unfair.
Vanderbilt's famous quote, "What do I care about the law? Hain't I got the power?" That kind of sums up the attitude.
Really does capture that sense of being above it all.
So inevitably, people started demanding regulation.
They did, but it was slow going at first. You had these strong beliefs in limited government, Jeffersonian ideas.
Free enterprise, the American dream.
Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. The idea was government shouldn't interfere much.
But the reality on the ground, especially for farmers in the 1870s.
Exactly. Economic hardship, feeling ripped off by the railroads, that pushed people to demand action.
And the courts got involved.
Yeah, some key Supreme Court cases.
Yeah.
The slaughterhouse cases in 73 actually limited federal power over businesses within a state. So that was mostly up to the states. Okay.
But then Munn v. Illinois in 77 was a big win for regulation. It said states could regulate businesses, like railroads, that served the public interest.
Ah, a step forward for regulation.
But then the Wabash case in 1886 kind of reversed that. It said states couldn't regulate interstate commerce stuff crossing state lines.
Only the federal government could do that.
Exactly. Which really pushed the demand for federal regulation. And another weird twist in 86, a ruling that said corporations were persons under the 14th Amendment.
Wait, the amendment meant to protect former slaves?
Yeah. But it ended up making it harder to regulate corporations because they now had these personal rights. It was complex.
So it's this back and forth, states versus federal, who controls what?
Precisely. And all this leads up to the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887.
Okay, the big one.
Yeah. Despite resistance from business, it passed. It created the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC.
First federal regulatory agency. Pretty much the first major one, yeah. It banned rebates and pools, made railroads publish their rates, outlawed that unfair short-haul, long-haul pricing.
Did it work right away?
Its initial power was limited, enforcement was tricky, but it was hugely significant.
How so?
It set up a federal body to oversee this stuff, a place to resolve disputes, and crucially, it was the first big federal attempt to regulate business for the public good. Set a huge precedent.
Okay, so railroads are burning, regulation is starting. What about other big businesses? Trusts.
Right. Alongside the railroads, you see this dramatic rise of huge companies and trusts. Part of the fuel for this was actually money made during the Civil War.
Wartime profiteering.
Yeah, created capital that needed investing. Plus, the U.S. had incredible natural resources. Think Mesabi Range iron ore in Minnesota.
And cheap labor.
Tons of it, from farms, from immigrants arriving, and technology was key. Again, interchangeable parts getting perfected, those business machines we mentioned.
Cash registers, typewriters.
Yeah, right. Patents were going through the roof. Cities were growing like crazy, pulling people in for jobs. The phone network spreading fast, mostly with women operators.
And Edison, the light bulb. Electricity.
Electricity was fundamental, powering factories, lighting homes and streets, changing everything.
So how did all this lead to trusts? What is a trust, technically?
Okay, so you had different strategies for dominating industries. Andrew Carnegie, in steel, he pioneered vertical integration.
Meaning?
Controlling every step, owning the mines, the transport, the factories, the distribution, all about efficiency and cost control.
Makes sense.
Then you had John D. Rockefeller in oil. His main game was horizontal integration.
Buying up the competition.
Exactly, or merging with them until you control almost the entire market for one product.
Right.
That led to the Standard Oil Trust in 1882.
How did the trust structure work?
Basically, stockholders in various companies would turn over their shares to a central board of trustees. That board then ran all the companies like one giant entity.
Giving Rockefeller immense control and wealth.
Unprecedented amounts. Then there was J.P. Morgan, the big financier. His trick was interlocking directorates.
Putting his people on different company boards.
You got it. Put his bankers on the boards of, say, railroads and steel companies, and suddenly he's influencing and coordinating across industries.
Lever? And holding companies.
That came later, partly to get around antitrust laws. Instead of a trust merging companies, a holding company would just buy enough stock in other companies to control them. Same result, different legal structure.
So all these methods led to massive concentration of power.
Huge concentration, which, definitely raised alarms about monopolies, but it also undeniably fueled incredible growth and mass production.
Let's talk about these titans. Carnegie. Steel was king, right?
Absolutely. Backbone of skyscrapers, railroads, everything. The Bessemer process made cheap steel possible.
In Carnegie's story, immigrant makes good.
Classic rags to riches, yeah. Scottish immigrant built this steel empire. Interestingly, he claimed to dislike trusts, even as he dominated. worked with Henry Clay Frick, who was pretty ruthless.
And then he sold out to Morgan.
Yep, sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan, who then created U.S. Steel, America's first billion-dollar corporation.
$1 billion.
Back then. Unimaginable wealth. And others like Charles Schwab were big in steel too. Then oil.
Rockefeller again. That first, well, in Pennsylvania, 1859.
Kicked off a frenzy. Rockefeller and Standard Oil just came to dominate. Ruthless tactics, people said.
But efficient.
Yeah, they delivered a reliable product pretty cheaply. That was part of their success. And you had others, Swift and Armor and meatpacking, Andrew Mellon funding lots of ventures.
So this explosion of wealth,
Yeah.
how does society react?
Well, you get the nouveau riche, the newly rich industrialists, and the older, established, wealthy families. They weren't always thrilled.
Resentment, snobbery.
A bit of all that. Feeling their influence slip. Some of the earliest antitrust voices came from those older elites, worried about this new concentration of power.
But overall, there was progress, right? Standard of living going up.
Undeniably. Despite the inequalities and anxieties, there was major material progress, and ideologies sprang up to justify this new order, like social Darwinism.
Applying Darwin's survival of the fittest to society.
Exactly. Thinkers like Herbert Spencer, William Graham Sumner, they argued the rich were just naturally fitter and interfering was, well, unnatural.
Wow. And some even brought God into it.
Oh, yeah. Rockefeller himself suggested his wealth was basically God's will, like a modern divine right of kings.
But there was also Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth.
Right, a counterpoint. Carnegie argued, yes, wealth is maybe God's will or a natural result, but the wealthy have a duty to use it for the public good. Philanthropy.
So give back.
Give back. He argued it was better than everyone just staying poor, but then you had others like Reverend Russell Conwell, his Acres of Diamonds speech.
What was that about?
Basically, that opportunity is everywhere. Anyone can get rich if they just look, which kind of implicitly blamed the poor for being poor.
So lots of justification for the status quo. And by 1890...
By 1890, corporations controlled a huge chunk of the nation's wealth. Unprecedented power.
Which leads back to regulation attempts. The Sherman Act.
Right, 1890, Sherman Antitrust Act. Direct response to public concern. It outlawed combinations and restraint of trade.
Sounds good on paper.
Yeah, but it lacks teeth, no real enforcement mechanism, and the Supreme Court kneecapped it early on.
That E.C. Knight case.
Yeah, ruling that sugar refining was manufacturing, not commerce, so the Sherman Act didn't apply. It made no sense, but it crippled the act against industrial monopolies for a while.
And it got used against unions instead.
Ironically, yes. Unions striking were seen as restraining trade. The act didn't really get effective until much later, like with the Clayton Act in 1914.
Still, the fact that the ICC and Sherman Act even passed, it shows public opinion was shifting, right?
Definitely. A growing sense that government needed to step in and protect people from unchecked corporate power.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. What was happening down south during all this? The New South.
Right. Politically, after Reconstruction ended, the Democrats took firm control. And a key part of that was disenfranchising black voters.
How'd they do that?
Literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, all designed to stop black men from voting, even though the Constitution supposedly guaranteed it.
And socially. Segregation.
Jim Crow laws became widespread, enforcing strict racial segregation. Power stayed largely with a white elite, the Redeemers, or Bourbons, who took over after Reconstruction.
Was there industry in the New South? People like Henry Grady pushed for it, right?
They did. Grady was a big booster, and some industry developed mill towns, for instance. But workers there were often heavily controlled, unions suppressed.
Any big successes?
James Buchanan Duke's Tobacco Trust became pretty huge, but overall the South stayed mostly agricultural.
Why didn't it industrialize faster?
Several reasons. One big one was railroad rates. It often cost more to ship goods north out of the South than the other way around. That hurt Southern businesses.
So agriculture remained king.
Yeah.
Sharecropping.
Yeah, the cropland system, sharecropping.
Yeah.
It trapped so many farmers, black and white, in debt. They'd borrow against future crops, get charged high interest, buy supplies on credit at inflated prices, often lost their land.
A vicious cycle.
Totally. And it pushed them towards cash crops like cotton, not growing food. Culturally, you also had the rise of the lost cause narrative.
Romanticizing the Confederacy.
Exactly. Confederate memorials popping up, stories like Joel Chandler Harris's Uncle Remus that presented a nostalgic, often inaccurate view of slavery in the Old South.
Okay, stepping back again. Overall impact of this whole Second Industrial Revolution. What are the big takeaways?
Huge changes. Standard of living generally rose for many. Cities exploded.
Industry definitely beat agriculture as the main economic engine.
Right. Monopoly kind of replaced free enterprise ideals. Work became more regimented, impersonal factory life.
But women gained some independence, new jobs.
Yeah, more jobs opened up, which affected family life, later marriage, smaller families sometimes. But also, probably the biggest gap between rich and poor in U.S. history.
Extreme wealth concentration.
Extreme. And all this production, it pushed the U.S. into foreign trade, made it a global economic player.
And all these changes
Yeah.
led to the labor movement, workers pushing back.
Exactly. Conditions for many workers were rough. Low-skilled jobs easily replaced, automation-threatening jobs, factories often dangerous, dirty, impersonal.
And little power against the bosses.
Very little. Bosses had lots of tools. Hiring scabs during strikes, courts usually sided with business, could call in troops.
Lockouts, yellow dog contracts.
Blacklisting organizers, company towns, controlling workers' lives. Plus, public opinion often wasn't sympathetic. Saw strikes as foreign or socialist or just disruptive.
Even if wages weren't terrible compared to elsewhere.
For some skilled workers, maybe,
Yeah.
but for the majority, conditions were harsh, insecure.
Did the Civil War affect unions?
Actually, yeah. Labor shortages during the war, rising living costs, it gave early unions a bit of a boost. National unions grew, collective bargaining started.
Like the National Labor Union.
Founded 1866, had big goals,
Yeah.
end the wage system, 8-hour day, had some success with government workers, but fizzled out. And they excluded black workers who formed their own unions.
They have the Molly Maguires.
Irish coal miners in Pennsylvania, mid-1870s, used violence, got infiltrated by Pinkertons, broken up, became symbols, martyrs to some, villains to others.
And the Great Railroad Strike of '77.
Huge nationwide response to wage cuts. Federal troops sent in by President Hayes. Over 100 people died. Strike failed, but it showed worker anger and inspired politics like the Greenback Labor Party.
Then came the Knights of Labor. They were different.
Yeah, led by Terence Powderly. Their idea was one big union, include almost everyone, skilled, unskilled.
Except who?
Lawyers, bankers, gamblers, liquor dealers,
Right.
but most workers welcome. Their goals were broader too: cooperatives, 8-hour day, regulating railroads.
Did they have success?
Some early wins, yeah, even against Jay Gould's railroads. But they declined fast after 1886.
Why? The Haymarket bombing?
That was huge. They got unfairly linked to it in the public mind. Massive backlash. Plus, employers fought back harder. Internal splits between skilled, unskilled workers. Powderly was maybe too cautious. They faded by the 1890s.
So who replaced them? AFL.
American Federation of Labor, yeah.
Yep.
Founded 1886, Samuel Gompers was the key figure. Very different approach.
How so?
Focused on skilled craft unions only. Much more conservative. Just bread and butter issues.
Or
Wages, hours, conditions.
practical stuff?
Exactly. Used tactics like demanding the closed shop, only union members get hired. Walkouts, boycotts. They grew significantly by 1900.
But excluded a lot of people.
Big time. Unskilled workers, women, African Americans, mostly left out of the AFL structure.
The 1890s saw some really brutal strikes too, right, Homestead?
1892, Carnegie Steel. Frick
Yeah.
cut wages, locked workers out. Led to a pitched battle between workers and Pinkerton guards. State militia came in. Union was crushed.
Yeah.
Vicious.
And the Pullman strike?
1894. Started over wage cuts in Pullman's company town near Chicago, where he didn't also cut rents. Eugene V. Debs and the American Railway Union joined in.
Shut down the railroads.
Paralyzed traffic nationwide. Federal government stepped in again. President Cleveland sent troops against the Illinois governor's wishes.
Why? What was the justification?
Officially, to keep the mail moving, which the strike was disrupting, but it broke the strike. Debs went to jail.
And became a socialist there.
That's the story. The government also used court injunctions heavily against the strike, raising fears about courts just siding with business government by injunction.
So lots of conflict. Did unions represent many workers overall?
Not really, still a small percentage by 1900, but things were slowly changing. Public acceptance grew bit by bit. Labor Day became a holiday.
What happened later, early 20th century?
More struggles, Supreme Court setbacks like Lochner v. New York, striking down labor laws. Membership dipped sometimes, but the AFL got more political. The Clayton Act eventually gave unions some protection, though then the post-WWI Red Scare hurt them again. It was an ongoing battle.
So wrapping this up, 1865 to 1900, It's just impossible to overstate the changes, isn't it?
Absolutely transformative. From farms to factories, small shops to massive corporations, local life to a national industrial economy, huge technological leaps.
Incredible wealth creation, but also stark inequality, social upheaval, the start of labor's fight.
It laid the groundwork for so much of modern America, the good and the bad.
And it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the long shadow of that era.
For sure.
I mean, how many of our debates today about inequality, the government's role in the economy, the future of work, how many really have their roots right back here?
Almost all of them, you could argue. This period really set the stage.
It truly shaped the nation we live in now.
Profoundly, not just economically or technologically, but socially, politically. The fundamental questions we still grapple with,